Hello, you're watching the Daily Roundup by People's Dispatch, where we bring you some of the top stories from around the world. Let's take a look at the headlines. Lula wins Brazilian presidency. Sudan demonstrators denounce military rule. UK protesters demand justice for police killings. Protesters police foil right-wing plans to seize oil plant in Bolivia. Widely popular leftist leader and former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva of the Workers' Party was elected president on Sunday, October 30. With almost 50.9% of the votes, Lula defeated incumbent Jair Bolsonaro of the Liberal Party, who got around 49.1% in the second round runoff election. The second round of the presidential election was held after neither candidate managed to obtain the necessary 50% plus one vote in the first round held on October 2nd. Elections were also held for the posts of governors in 12 states. Around 156 million Brazilians were eligible to vote in the election. Lula is set to be in office from 2023 to 2027. The results mark a remarkable comeback for Lula, who just a few years ago was in jail on corruption charges which were later overturned. His campaign for this election was driven by the left, people's movements, trade unions, and radical and progressive forces across the country. Following news of Lula's victory, celebrations started across Brazil. Dozens of people reportedly came out on the streets, chanted slogans, and played music in Lula's support to express their joy over his victory over Bolsonaro. Lula himself posted the Brazilian flag with the word democracy on it on social media after winning the election. Later in the day, during a victory speech in Sao Paulo, Lula called for all Brazilians to end their differences in the interest of rebuilding the country and reducing hunger and poverty. He noted that the election was a victory of the democratic movement and of the Brazilian people. He railed against growing economic inequality and economic hardships faced by millions of ordinary Brazilians. He noted the significance of adequate employment, living wages, and fair and equitable economic and public policies that benefit all Brazilians instead of only the few rich at the top. Thousands of protesters staged demonstrations on Sunday, October 30, in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, against the current military rule in the country. The protesters demanded a return to civilian and democratic rule. According to reports, thousands of protesters in central Khartoum marched to the presidential palace, waving Sudanese flags and holding up photos of those killed by the military during the pro-democracy protests. Protests were additionally reported from North Khartoum and Omdurman across the Nile River, where protesters blocked roads and chanted slogans against military rule. Reports noted protests in the eastern city of Kassala as well, where around 800 young men and women staged demonstrations demanding civilian rule and chanted slogans calling on the soldiers to return to their military barracks. The embattled country has been witnessing regular protests for the last year since the military captured power after overthrowing a transitional civilian government. The transitional civilian government was put in place 3 years ago after a popular uprising rid the country of former President Omar al-Bashir. Ensuing protests against the military takeover and disruption to civilian rule met with a violent repressive crackdown by the security forces. According to medics, 119 protesters have so far been killed by security forces in the last 1 year. Hundreds of others have died as a result of political instability and the declining security situation in the country. The political crisis has further aggravated the economic situation, with reports noting widespread and acute food shortages, steadily rising inflation, and worsening poverty and unemployment plaguing the country. Moving on to our third story, families of men and women killed by the police in the United Kingdom staged a march in London on Saturday, October 29, to demand justice and accountability for the victims. The annual protest march organized by the United Friends and Families Campaign, or UFFC, for the last 26 years had hundreds of protesters participate. The family members of Chris Kaba and Odaje Omisho, two black men recently killed by the police, were among the protesters. They reportedly marched from Trafalgar Square to Downing Street, chanting slogans demanding justice without delay, while carrying large banners and posters and wearing t-shirts with the names and faces of the victims. Several family members, including those of Kaba and Omishore and other victims, spoke to the gathered crowd of protesters and remembered their loved ones killed by the police. Reports noted that relatives of the victims later went into Downing Street to deliver a letter to the newly appointed Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. 24-year-old Chris Kaba, the latest victim of police violence, was killed after being shot in the head by a firearms officer of the Metropolitan Police in Streatham Hill, London on September 5. The police had claimed they were in pursuit of the car Kaba was driving at the time after its plates were flagged off for a recent firearm incident. Family members denied Kaba was involved in a chase with the police and noted that his car was blocked by police vehicles before he was ultimately killed. Kaba's killing resulted in widespread anger and outrage against police racism and brutality. Numerous protests were held in the aftermath of the killing, demanding justice for Kaba, effective action, and police reforms to stop such incidents from occurring in the future. Earlier in the year, 41-year-old Oladeji Omishore fell into a river and died hours later after police officials tasered him repeatedly with an electric stun gun that reportedly carried a shock of up to 50,000 volts. Investigations in both incidents are ongoing and at the Independent Office for Police Conduct. And finally, members of the ultra-conservative Crucenista Youth Union, or UJC, with ties to the governor of Santa Cruz, Luis Fernando Camacho, and the country's right-wing political opposition on Sunday, October 30, tried to illegally take over the Palma Sola storage plant of Bolivian Fiscal Oil Fields, YPFB. Area residents confronted the invaders and tried to protect the plants, leading to clashes between the two sides. Local police reportedly had to intervene to restore law and order. They eventually stopped the miscreants and maintained security at the plant. Reports said the invaders attacked the police with stones and firecrackers before the police action managed to foil their intentions and take over the plant and disperse the attackers. Later in the day, thousands of people from local indigenous groups and other social organizations in the area staged demonstrations demanding the resignation of right-wing Governor Camacho. Reports noted that after a town hall that was held in the Yapasani municipality in the Ischilo province of Santa Cruz, the protesters decided to march to the capital of Santa Cruz to denounce the proposed general strike on the part of the governor and others. Governor Camacho and other government officials have reportedly called for a general strike and caused widespread economic disruption for the people of the area as part of their political vendetta and conspiracy against left-wing President Luis Arce. This has substantially increased their economic suffering and inflicted extensive damage to vital economic sectors important for the livelihoods of the local people, while not affecting the large corporations and businesses close to the right-wing opposition. The protesters have additionally begun the process of initiating a recall referendum against the governor to remove him from power. For months, the right-wing neoliberal opposition in Bolivia has been trying to overthrow President Arce from power, but has so far been unsuccessful. And that's all for today's episode. For more such stories, visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.